Hey there, so I am at the park right now with Nugget. I just want to chat for a second about the NCLEX because I have a lot of people ask me about the NCLEX and what it takes to pass it, because there's nothing more frustrating than after you finished a couple years of school trying to figure out what the best testing or studying module is going to be. And I believe that there's no one right answer, and I'm sorry, that's just unfortunate. There are a million different products on the market that are going to tell you they know exactly what it takes to pass the NCLEX. They're going to tell you that their product is best, and it's true in some way, but it's not true in other ways. And that's one of the confusing problems, is that every single module that's out there is going to tell you that their product is the answer to what you need. I remember when I was taking the nursing or the NCLEX exam, or when I was prepping to take it, I was freaking out because I went to Borders bookstore. This is back in the time before internet was as informative as it is today, but Borders was my Google. And when I went to Borders, I found that there were tons and tons of books and products, even at that time, back in 2000, to tell me how to pass the exam. So I sat in Borders for 3 hours one night, and I literally went through all of them. And as I did that, I got even more confused. So I would tell you to avoid the over confusion. Start with one product, test it, and see how you feel. But I would avoid products that are going to tell you they have a step-by-step plan with all kinds of things that are confusing. And what I ended up doing was buying a deck of 1,500 cards. I did buy the Kaplan book. That was helpful in some ways, but it scared me in other ways too, because Kaplan, had their own system. At that time, it wasn't all about questions. It was about spending weeks to prepare, and then, or months, whatever it was at the time. I think it was a couple months, and you paid for the course, and you went on Saturdays, and you sat with an instructor and went over it. And everybody I knew that went to Kaplan passed. They did great, and they liked it. I didn't have the money at the time to go to Kaplan. I wanted to, but I couldn't afford it. I had 2 kids, a mortgage, and a lot of responsibility at the time, so it scared me. So I bought the book. I think I bought 2 books. I bought a Lippincott book and I bought a Kaplan book, and I peeked into those a little bit. What ultimately helped me was these 2 things. I took ACLS, BLS, and PALS before I even became a nurse. I did it about 8 months prior because I was working in the ER, and I thought it would be helpful. And you don't have to be an RN to take ACLS, BLS, and PALS. You don't need to wait for your license. That course, I did the full course at UCLA at the time. It helped me tremendously to understand cardiac drugs, rhythm strips, antiarrhythmics, why we use what. It put some pieces together for me, and it helped me in processing steps and what's important during a code. Because there's going to be a couple questions on the NCLEX about that. I do remember antiarrhythmics being on there, and from my understanding, even after outdated drugs were no longer in use, they were still putting them on the NCLEX. I know beryllium was on there 7 years past its time. I talked to a lot of nurses who still saw it, and it confused them. But at the time I got my ACLS cert, beryllium was an antiarrhythmic we were using. But I do know that it was still on the NCLEX up through 2007 or 8, something like that. It's after 20-something years that it's foggy. Nugget's still very impatient. You want to go chase the ball? Come on, let's go. Okay, let's go. He's so good at this. He's getting tired though. So I took the ACLS course, and on top of taking ACLS, I was also working in the ICU at this point on my IP license. So I had a lot going on. I bought the 1,500 cards deck, and I would take a chunk of cards with me everywhere I went, in my purse to the grocery store, to work, and I would focus on that stack of cards depending on what I was doing at the time. I could be standing in line waiting to pay at the store, and I would be looking at the cards and trying to keep my kids from getting out of the cart. But I would take one card and look at the question. I would try to answer it without looking at the back. And then after I answered it, I would look at the back, and even if I got it right, I would read through the rationales on why each one was correct, why one was wrong. And I would kind of play it over in my mind as if I were watching it occur. I'm a visual learner. Some people are visual learners. Some people are auditory learners. For me, the visual learning helped me. So I would really think through that process of what I was seeing in the scenario that I was given. Most of the questions on the test are scenarios. If so-and-so is in charge of this patient and they go into a room and see this, what do they do next? This is the next part I want to tell you about. There's always a toss away. One of the answers, it could be a multiple choice of 4 or 5 or 3. There was a varying number on those multiple choice. And what I saw was that one was always a throwaway. There was always one that was dead wrong. You don't do that. And you pretty much know which one that is. Then there were 3. One sounded correct, but it was pointing you in the wrong direction, so it was wrong too. Then there would be 2, and of those 2, both of them were correct, but they were looking for one specific answer. And that's where people get frustrated, because that one specific answer isn't something you may have seen yet out in the field because you haven't been working. And until you're working and putting those processes into play, it can be hard to discern what that is. That is why repetitive testing and questions will help you. Keep going over questions. The more questions you can practice, the better, because as you look at those rationales of why this one is right or wrong, it's going to help you. By the time I went and took the NCLEX exam, I think I had overstudied. And I say that because when I took the exam, every single question on my NCLEX, no joke, every single question was identical to the cards I bought. It was on one of the cards. And I'm not talking about scenarios that were similar. I'm talking about the question, a 36-year-old male with blah, blah, blah. They were on those cards. Those cards had the questions from the NCLEX. After the test, I went through, immediately ran to my cards and started pulling them. And I looked and they were identical. So I was shocked that those questions had all of the questions that were on my test. By going over that deck of cards multiple times, answering those questions, thinking through the rationales, not only was I prepared just to answer the questions and know what the correct answer was, I also understood things better. And I hear a saw going off in the background, so it may be hard to hear me, so I'm going to pause this for a minute. Okay, so back to what we were talking about the NCLEX. When I took the NCLEX exam, there was a million products on the market, even 22 years ago. There was more confusing information to me that only increased my anxiety. I would encourage you not to go down that rabbit hole because it is a rabbit hole. So have you gone down the NCLEX rabbit hole? I did. I definitely did when I was trying to practice or learned about taking the test. This was before Google was as infamous as it is now, and where you could find anything on the internet. That wasn't the case in 2000. If you've gone down the NCLEX rabbit hole, I totally get it. I did too when I was studying and trying to practice for the test. I literally drove myself insane trying to figure out what was going to be the best way to study. And I felt kind of left out because a lot of my fellow students were taking Kaplan Review, which was recommended by our school at the time. And Kaplan was very expensive for me. I was, raising 2 kids. I had a lot of responsibilities. So it wasn't feasible for me to afford Kaplan at the time. So I did what anybody would do. I went to my version of Google, which was Borders Bookstore back in the day, and I sat down in the aisle one night when I had a babysitter for 3 hours, and I started scouring all of the practice and books and what was going to be the best for me on my budget, which was very little. And when I walked out of Borders, I had 2 books and a deck of 1,500 cards. And the 1,500 cards was my godsend. So of the 1,500 cards that I worked on all the time, I took a little stack of cards with me everywhere I went. Had them in my purse or a bag or a diaper bag or whatever I had, breast pump bag at the time. And I would take a little chunk of the stack and work through those questions every time I had an opportunity to do it. Because I had to study on the fly. I didn't have chunks of hours and hours at a time that were devoted to just study. I was working at work and I had the kids and I had responsibilities at school. And I had gone into a new grad program at USC and was working in the surgical ICU. Yeah, there was that. And that was a whole new grad program in itself. That was an 18-month program, which included didactic class learning and preceptorship. And that was probably one of the best things I did because it was something that really prepared me for processes, understanding the human body, understanding medicine in general and how everything works. And it was a trial by fire kind of thing, but I worked there for 3 years and got, the green washed off of being a baby nurse. And by the time I left, I wasn't a baby nurse anymore. I wasn't green. I felt like I was well-seasoned, Cajun crispy fried. But it did prepare me for going into the real world and nursing. And, I was able to kind of pick and choose my jobs at that point.